All right, just after Christmas. You probably got lots of good presents, maybe some gift cards. Maybe you're wondering what you should do with all that Amazon money you just made. I would always recommend books, but what kind of book would you get if you are an aspiring philosopher? Well, I would recommend
I can't get it off my mind.
Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosophers Bookshelf, where we explore books that have some kind of philosophical interest. So, yeah, like I said, I'm just after Christmas. If you didn't see my last episode, we are in New Mexico, and that is why we're in such a strange backdrop. I'm here just after Christmas with my favorite Christmas gifts. I actually got this from a student, a Yeti mug, which is amazing. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. Anyway, the book I have for you today is called Sophie's World by Jostein Gaarder. I think that's how you say it. He's Norwegian or something like that. So it is a book written for people that are don't have any experience in philosophy and are interested in some of these big ideas, but you're not academic per se, right? You have a mind for interesting thoughts, but not a mind for sitting down in front of a textbook. Right? Jostein, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Jostein wrote a book in novel form about a kid that's learning philosophy, and her name is obviously Sophie, 14 years old, and she starts to get these strange letters from a middle-aged man, which is pretty weird now that I think about it, right? I mean, I don't know how they do it in Norwegia, but in the United States, you're not allowed to contact teenage girls if you're a middle-aged man. Anyway, it's totally innocent, nothing weird in the book. But he sends these letters asking weird questions in the morning, and then in the afternoon she gets another letter, and it is something about a philosopher who, for some reason, his query into the world has to do with those weird questions in the beginning. And then in the middle of the book, there's a plot twist, and everything gets totally shifted. I won't reveal that, though, because I think you should read the book. It's an interesting book. I would say most academic philosophers dislike this book, including myself at first. All right? At first time I saw this book, I started reading it with a student that I was doing a special course with, and she wanted to read this book, and I hated it right off the bat because, here's why, not because it's poorly written or anything like that, but because I thought, oh, well, this isn't academic philosophy, right? This is fiction, right? What is this? I think that if you are a philosopher, you might have a little bit of that in you. There's a philosopher named Immanuel Kant who thought that philosophy should be work. It shouldn't be something you enjoy. You should do it. You could call it a purist perspective, right? He thought you should do philosophy because you should do philosophy, right? Because you are a philosopher. And you shouldn't expect anybody to, motivate you to do philosophy. There is some of that, I think. But at the same time, from the very beginning of philosophy, it started off with people being motivated by inspiring things, right? So there's a famous quote by Socrates: "All philosophy begins in wonder," and you don't get wonder. You aren't, charged into wonder by just looking at information. That's not what is fascinating to people. So I personally would take now when I look back on it, I think this is a good book. I think it's a good book for starters because it does motivate you. The story hooks you a little bit, and it makes those thoughts just appear like they would really in everyday conversation, or at least closer to everyday conversation. And I think that's what inspires people to do philosophy. It's not just looking at information. I mean, that's why we have philosophy teachers, right? If my job as a philosophy teacher were just to shove philosophy down your throat, my job could be done by a computer, right? Information is not what brings good philosophy. What brings good philosophy is dialogue. Like I say at the end of every one of my episodes, right? It is the dialogue that makes philosophy interesting. That's where we get our good ideas from. Which is interesting also because Jostein wrote this book more as a history of philosophy investigation. And that is probably the most boring way to do philosophy. But hold on a second. I know I said that, and I said it's an interesting book. So let me explain. The Philosophy Learning and Teaching Organization, I think that's what it's called. I'm a member of it, so I should know. But Plato, they are an organization that focus on teaching philosophy, and not just the college level, but in the high school level, and just inspiring more than just academic philosophers. They recommend teaching philosophy in a particular way, which is looking at interesting questions, paradoxes, that exist in the world, or something like that. Things that inspire philosophical investigation, and not looking at philosophy as history of philosophy, which is interesting and is important. Like you want to, it helps to know where an idea came from, because then you can see kind of how it evolves. And a lot of the motivation for what the philosophers say make a lot more sense. But a lot of times the history of philosophy can get really boring, because people get bogged down in, well, I take Aristotle to mean this. Well, you could translate this word, and you're like, oh God, just shoot me. But those big questions that the philosophers themselves asked, that is fascinating. That's what people like. However, Jostein has an interesting take where he actually is combining both methods, right? The history of philosophy method and the big question method. He poses those questions at the beginning, in the morning for this little Sophie, right? And then in the afternoon shows how a historical philosopher was inspired by that question to pursue more, more investigation. So yeah, I think it's an interesting take. It shows. I mean, it takes one of the most boring ways to teach philosophy and twists it into one of the most interesting. So yeah, I would recommend that if you are not a philosopher by trade, and you don't have a lot of exposure, and you want to kind of see some of these ideas, and yet the academic side seems to be a little daunting, I would definitely recommend you checking it out. I'll put a link in the description to have so you can check out that book. Also, again, like I said before, best philosophy happens in dialogue. Let me know in the comments what you think about this book. Do you think it was written well? Or you know what else? If you have a book that you want me to review from a philosophical perspective, I'd love to do so. So in the comments also, please let me know if there are any books that you want me to check out. I have some other books that I'm going to come out with some recommendations for coming up here soon. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, please, and tag a friend so that they can join the conversation. Adios.